After 5 games in the World Chess Championship, 5 draws, everything still level. In the 6th game, the challenger Sergei Karjakin had the white pieces, and it was once again a Spanish. Very theoretical. And once again, Carlsen offered to potentially go into the Marshall Gambit. So if white plays c3 in this position, then I'm guessing he would probably play the Marshall. At the moment, it has a very, very good theoretical reputation. And if you're backed up by a serious opening preparation, then good weapon for black. But once again, we have a closed and anti-Marshall move, and black really can't play d5 now. This is completely different, because in this position, if you imagine a Marshall has the pawn on c3, but there's no pawn on c3 here, so white can simply play the knight out, and black really doesn't have any significant initiative. But Carlsen played bishop b7, the normal move in this position, and then d3 from white. So white sort of tries to prove that this bishop is misplaced on b7, is blunted by this structure. And if you recall, this was exactly the same as game 4 in this match, where Carlsen played d6, and it worked out very well for the world champion. But today, Carlsen did something different. He played pawn to d5. So this is another kind of Marshall Gambit. It's similar in style. So in this case, black has compensation instead of taking on e5. Compensation in the form of these 2 active knights, and of course that bishop striking across the board. Very dangerous. Now, this is not played off the top of Carlsen's head. This sacrifice is actually very, very well known. It's been very well played in almost a couple of hundred expert games, and very well analysed. So they're doing nothing terribly new here. So those knights very strong, and black always has this bishop in the knight's sights, so can always try and grab the 2 bishops against compensation, and that's what happened. Bishop f4, slightly unusual move, but doesn't really affect the assessment of this position. And Carlsen exchanged knight for bishop, so black has 2 bishops, and already that gives black compensation. And now c5, and in striking out on the queen side with these pawns, obviously it cramps white's 4 pawns here, so white isn't playing d4 and claiming the centre, and the knight looking good, hitting c2, bishops look fine. So knight e4, but is it worth a pawn? f6 played by Carlsen, both players playing reasonably quickly. And now Carlsen's next move was extraordinary. At least to humanise, this is an extraordinary next move. He played f5. Now, such a positionally irresponsible move I would never expect from someone like Magnus Carlsen. The only way you play a move which is as ugly as this is if you've prepared it extremely well with a computer and you can justify it tactically. The pawn move weakens g5, it weakens the e5 and e6 squares. Positionally dreadful. In fact, it's fine for black. Okay, what's the justification for this move? Well, first of all, if the knight goes back to g3, then black can exchange bishop for knight. Queen takes bishop will be met by knight c2, obviously fine, more than fine for black. And, well, you can't really countenance a move like pawn takes bishop, shattering the pawns, obviously great for black. Okay, what happens if the knight comes back here? Well, the knight can retreat there. But in this case, you can see that knight is rather dominated. It's, these squares are covered. Sorry, let me get the paint off the board. And black's bishops look superb. In this case, the weaknesses on e6 and e5 don't really have any significance. Bishop striking down here. Black just has excellent compensation. But the real test of this move is knight to g5. So that knight looks in at the e6 square. And at first glance, it looks absolutely dreadful. Well, I mean, I was sure that Carlsen had this under control, to be honest, because he played this very quickly. He took on g5. Now, if bishop takes, then tactically that's poor, because of bishop takes knight and queen takes bishop, so that's impossible. So obviously knight takes, and again, knight e6 the threat. And now h6, driving the knight into this square. The knight can't retreat once, like to come into e5, but once again bishop takes f3 with the same problem as before for white. So the knight has to go in to e6. The knight forks queen and rook. Only move, queen d5, threatening mate on g2. f3 forced. Carlsen was playing these moves virtually instantly, so you can bet your life this is preparation. And Karjakin was also playing relatively quickly as well. So what's the point of doing this? Well, the rook threatens the knight. Now it starts to get highly tactical. If the knight goes into c7, in fact, forking everything. In fact, black is absolutely fine after this check. And you exchange on e1 and queen takes f4. And now black is absolutely fine. In fact, the game should end in a draw after queen check. And this, it looks, is a ridiculous variation, obviously a computer variation. And it's going to be a draw by perpetual check after this move, even though black is a piece up temporarily. So knight c7 doesn't offer white any advantage. Karjakin played rook e5, also a move that looks incredibly scary for black, but in fact there is no danger. Carlsen played queen d6, a move which looks really ugly, putting it in the same line as the bishop, but there's no way to exploit this. You can retreat the rook, the queen goes back, knight takes pawn is impossible because of queen d4 check. Knight c7 is, a reasonable try, but in fact in this position the knight has great problems. And here, well, again, tactics are in black's favour. So check and hitting the bishop. I mean, this is a long tactical line, but basically black is fine in this endgame. No difficulties at all. I mean, you can see these pawns are shattered. So let's go back. So in this position, incredibly, there is nothing really decent for white. Karjakin played pawn to c3, attacking the knight. Now, if knight takes pawn, now this fails tactically to rook takes c5. It's such a tricky position. If you've prepared this with a computer, then it's not tricky. This spews out the right answers very quickly. So bishop takes queen threatened, and if queen takes knight, and white is a pawn up. So let's go back. After c3, instead, rook takes knight. And now the position simplifies. And in fact, we're left with a very dull position. Pawns are even. There are opposite coloured bishops. Now, if white, on a very good day, could play something like d4 and lock this bishop into this wonderful square on e5 and somehow activate queen and rook, then you might have something, but it's just not possible. There isn't enough time to do all this. So after thinking for about 15 minutes, Karjakin satisfied himself that there's no way for white to press at all in this position actually. And after a few more moves, they liquidated to a draw. I mean, this bishop on f4 is nominally better than the bishop on b7. You know, it has a nice square here, but it's not enough when the queen and bishop are so solidly placed, and these pawns are weak. And after these moves, more pawns were exchanged. And one more move, and here the players agree to a draw. Actually, they're only allowed to agree to a draw after move 30. So that's move 32, and they got there. So, something of a disappointment for the spectators. We haven't seen many short games in this match so far. So why did Karjakin play such a kind of mild opening variation? Well, first of all, he wanted to test Carlsen's opening preparation, and I think we can see that Carlsen passed the test with flying colours, played this anti-positional move f5, which is in fact is absolutely correct, and he levelled the position very easily. But above all, I think Karjakin basically wanted an easy game today. They've had a lot of very long games, and I would say he is very tired, so he wanted to play an easy game, and if he didn't get any advantage from the opening, fine. A short draw, that suits him well. You know, these matches are long and they're tough, and it takes a great deal out of the players, so it happens in these matches sometimes. We have to see the match as a whole. So tomorrow, Saturday, is a free day in New York, and they play the 7th game on Sunday, and once again Karjakin has the white pieces. They do a kind of turnaround in colours at the halfway stage in the match. So 6 games and everything is still level.